Michael still remembered the last quiet morning before everything changed. The air smelled faintly of salt from the bay, the kind of crisp spring breeze that made you want to linger outside just a little longer. He was in the yard, hammer in hand, fixing a loose board on the fence. Behind him, the kettle whistled from the kitchen, and Clara appeared at the back door carrying 2 mugs of tea. She had her hair tied up, no makeup, wearing the faded sweater he'd bought her years ago. "Thought you could use a break," she said, setting the mugs on the little patio table. Michael smiled, wiping his hands on a rag before joining her. Perfect timing. Fence is just about good as new. It was the kind of simple moment they'd had countless times in their 5 years together. No rush, no noise, just the comfort of each other's company. They sat in easy silence, watching a couple of seagulls drift lazily over the water at the far end of the street. Then the sound of a delivery truck broke the calm. It pulled up in front of the house, and a man in a navy jacket stepped out holding a thick envelope. He walked straight up to the porch and asked for Clara by name. She glanced at Michael, confused, before signing for it. The envelope was heavy, official-looking, with the return address of a law firm in another state. She tore it open right there, pulling out a stack of papers and a short typed letter. Her eyes darted quickly over the words. Then they stopped. She read the first line again, slower this time, as if making sure she hadn't imagined it. Michael noticed the way her hands tightened on the paper. "What is it?" he asked. Clara looked up at him, her voice unsteady but almost disbelieving. "My Uncle Henry. He passed away last month. And he left me his house, and a lot more than that." Michael didn't know Uncle Henry. Clara had only mentioned him once or twice in all the years they'd been together. But when she handed him the papers, his eyes caught on the numbers printed there. It was more money than either of them had ever imagined having, enough to change their lives completely. He smiled because in that moment he saw it as good news. He saw a future where they could pay off the mortgage, fix the roof, maybe even take the trip to Italy they'd always talked about. What he didn't see, not yet, was how quickly that same envelope would start pulling them in different directions. The following weekend, they drove out to see the house Uncle Henry had left her. It sat on a quiet street lined with towering oak trees, their branches twisting over the road like an old canopy. The house itself was nothing short of grand, a 2-story colonial with white columns, wide porches, and a wraparound balcony that looked like it had been lifted from a postcard. Michael parked at the curb and took it all in. "Well," he said with a low whistle, "this isn't exactly a fixer-upper." Clara laughed, but there was a new sparkle in her eyes. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" They stepped inside, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Sunlight poured through tall windows, hitting polished wood floors that creaked softly under their steps. Every corner of the place seemed to hum with history. Framed photographs of people Michael didn't know, shelves packed with worn novels, a grandfather clock ticking away in the hall. For a moment he felt happy for her. She was seeing a part of her family's story she'd never really known, and it was exciting. But as they moved from room to room, Michael began to notice the subtle shift. Clara wasn't just admiring the house, she was claiming it, already talking about my study, my reading nook, and how the master bedroom would be perfect for me. When they got back to their own home that evening, Clara's mother was waiting in the driveway. Margaret never just dropped by. She stepped out of her car, immaculately dressed as always, her hair perfectly in place. "I've been trying to call you," Margaret said to Clara, barely glancing at Michael. "We need to talk about that house, and the inheritance." Inside, over a pot of coffee Michael didn't remember offering, Margaret wasted no time. "Clara, this is a chance to live the life you deserve. That neighbourhood, that house, is not something you share with just anyone." Michael felt the sting in her words but stayed quiet, letting Clara respond. "Mom, Michael's my husband," Clara said, though her voice carried a hesitation he hadn't heard before. Margaret gave a polite but pointed smile. "Of course, but you have to be smart. This kind of opportunity doesn't come twice." That night in bed, Michael couldn't shake the feeling. Margaret's words weren't just opinions, they were seeds. And as he lay there beside Clara staring at the ceiling, he wondered how long it would take for those seeds to grow. It didn't happen all at once. At first it was little things. Dinners that used to be the two of them at the small kitchen table now replaced with Clara meeting new friends in the city. Weekends they once spent walking by the bay turned into real estate tours and wine tastings with people Michael had never met. He tried to be supportive. "Go, have fun," he'd say, kissing her cheek before she left. But the space between them was widening, like a slow tide pulling back from the shore. One Friday evening, Michael decided to cook her favourite, roast chicken with rosemary, the kind that filled the whole house with a warm, homey smell. He set the table, lit a couple of candles, and waited. The clock ticked past 7, then 8. At 8:30, his phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Dinner with friends. Don't wait up." He sat there for a long time, the food going cold, before quietly blowing out the candles. The following week, Margaret called while Clara was in the shower. Michael almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of him. Her voice came through sharp and deliberate. "Michael, you have to understand. Clara's stepping into a new world. She needs to focus on herself now, not be held back." He didn't respond, just let her talk until the line went silent, but her words clung to him like smoke. Saturday morning, they were supposed to go to the farmer's market together. Instead, Clara announced over coffee that she'd been invited to a weekend retreat with her new circle. "It's just a chance to connect, you know, people who understand where I'm at right now." Michael tried to smile, but something in his chest sank. "And where is that, Clara?" She hesitated, eyes dropping to her cup. "I don't know, just somewhere different." That night, lying alone in bed, Michael realised he could still hear her laughter in his head. But it wasn't for him anymore. It was a Tuesday evening when the break finally came. Michael had spent the day fixing a leaky faucet for a neighbour and was looking forward to a quiet night. As he turned onto their street, something felt off. The porch light was on, but the curtains in the front window were drawn tight. Clara never closed them before dark. He pulled into the driveway and noticed them immediately. 2 suitcases sitting side by side on the porch. His suitcases. Michael stepped out of the truck slowly. The kind of slow that comes when your body knows what's happening before your mind wants to believe it. He climbed the steps, tried the front door. Locked. He knocked once, then again, harder this time. Through the narrow glass pane beside the door, he saw movement. Clara appeared in the hallway. For a second he thought she might open it. Instead, she stood still, her face unreadable, then turned and walked away without a word. He knocked again, his voice catching. "Clara, what's going on? Can we just talk?" No answer, just the faint echo of her heels on the hardwood floor fading into another room. Michael sat down on the top step beside his bags, the wood cool under him. He looked around, the yard he'd mowed every week, the flowers they'd planted last spring, the welcome mat they'd picked out together. All of it felt different now, like it belonged to someone else. After what felt like hours, he pulled out his phone and called Daniel. "She kicked me out," Michael said quietly. There was a pause, then Daniel's voice sharpened. "Where are you?" "Right here, on the porch, with my bags." Daniel didn't waste time. 15 minutes later, his old sedan pulled up to the curb. He helped Michael load the suitcases into the trunk, then drove him to his apartment across town. The ride was mostly silent, except for one moment when Daniel glanced over and said, "We'll figure this out, but you need to tell me everything." Michael nodded, staring out at the passing streetlights. He wasn't ready to talk yet, not because he didn't know what to say, but because deep down he feared that putting it into words would make it all too real. Daniel's apartment was small, but it felt like a safe harbour. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, and a stack of law journals sat on the coffee table beside an old baseball glove. Michael dropped his suitcases by the door and sank into the couch, rubbing his hands over his face. They sat there for a while, the only sound coming from the hum of the refrigerator in the tiny kitchen. Finally, Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "All right," he said, "start from the top, everything." Michael told him about the inheritance, the shift in Clara's behaviour, the dinners she no longer came home for, and the way Margaret's voice had started showing up in their marriage more than his own. He spoke about the retreat, the coldness, and finally the suitcases on the porch. Daniel listened without interrupting, his lawyer's mind piecing things together. When Michael finished, there was a long pause. Then Daniel asked, "You remember that prenup her mother made you sign before the wedding?" Michael nodded. "How could I forget? She shoved it in front of me the night before, said it was to protect the family's assets. I didn't care. I loved her. I signed without thinking twice." Daniel reached for his laptop. "Yeah, well, that might actually be the thing that helps you now." Michael frowned. "Pretty sure it's the thing that protects her, not me." "Mostly, yes," Daniel said, flipping through scanned files on his screen. "But I remember reading something odd in there. A clause about any significant assets acquired during the marriage, regardless of who inherits or earns them, being considered marital property." Michael blinked. "You're saying the house and the money?" Daniel looked up, a small, knowing smile on his face. "I'm saying that protective clause her mother insisted on might mean she owes you half." Michael leaned back, stunned. "She'll fight it." "Oh, she will," Daniel said, closing the laptop. "But she's not the only one who knows how to fight." For the first time in days, Michael felt a flicker of something that wasn't just hurt, it was resolve. He didn't want revenge, but he also couldn't let himself be thrown away like he'd never been part of her life. Daniel poured them both a cup of coffee and slid one across the table. "Drink up," he said. "Tomorrow we start." Michael took the mug in his hands, the warmth seeping into his palms. He didn't know how ugly it would get, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to walk away quietly. They didn't wait long to make their first move. 3 days after Daniel filed the initial paperwork, Michael woke up to find his checking account almost empty. It was the joint account he and Clara had used for groceries and bills, and now the balance was just a few dollars. He stared at the online banking screen, jaw tightening, before calling the bank. The answer was polite but firm. "Mrs. Carter withdrew the funds yesterday afternoon." That same afternoon, he got an email from a company that had recently interviewed him for a maintenance supervisor position. They thanked him for his time, but said something concerning had come up during his background check. No specifics, no chance to explain. When he told Daniel, the lawyer's expression hardened. "They're not just playing hardball," Daniel said. "They're trying to make you look unstable so you'll back down." It got worse. 2 days later, a process server knocked on Daniel's apartment door and handed Michael a restraining order, filed by Clara. It claimed he'd been harassing her and acting erratic since moving out. Michael felt the heat rush to his face. "This is all lies. She knows I haven't even gone near her since that night." Daniel held up a hand. "I know, but remember, they want you angry. Angry makes mistakes. Mistakes cost cases." That night, Michael sat on the couch, staring at the TV without really seeing it. The betrayal burned deeper now, not just because Clara had shut him out, but because she was willing to twist the truth to erase the years they'd built together. Daniel came in from his home office, holding his phone. "I'm calling in a favour," he said. "I know a reporter who loves a good underdog story. If they want to drag you through the mud, we'll make sure the world sees who's really in the dirt." The next morning, the headline was everywhere. "Husband kicked out after wife inherits fortune. Now he's fighting back." Michael scrolled through the comments in disbelief. Strangers from across the country were leaving words of encouragement, calling the situation unfair, telling him to hold his ground. For the first time since the suitcases hit the porch, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't standing in this fight alone. By the end of the week, the story had spread far beyond their small coastal town. Local radio stations picked it up, then regional news outlets. Every time Michael's phone buzzed, it was another text from someone he hadn't heard from in years. An old co-worker, a high school friend, telling him they'd seen his name in the headlines and were rooting for him. Clara stayed silent in public, but Margaret couldn't resist firing back. She called into one of the local talk shows, her voice sharp and dismissive. "This man is trying to take advantage of my daughter's good fortune," she said. "He's always been after her money. Now he's just using the press to make himself look like a victim." Daniel replayed the clip in his office and smirked. "That right there is gold. She just admitted on air that this is about the money. Her money makes our argument stronger." The court date came sooner than expected. On a grey Thursday morning, Michael walked into the courthouse wearing his only suit, the one he'd worn to weddings and job interviews. He kept his head high, even when he spotted Clara across the hallway, standing beside her mother. She looked different now, polished, distant, like someone he might pass on the street without recognizing. When the proceedings began, Daniel went straight to the prenup. He read the clause out loud. Any substantial asset acquired by either party during the course of the marriage shall be considered shared marital property. It was clear, unambiguous, and signed by both parties. Clara's lawyer argued that the inheritance was a personal gift, not subject to division. But Daniel countered with case law, examples, and the very language her mother had insisted on years ago. Michael sat quietly through it all, hands folded, eyes forward. He didn't need to shout or argue. The truth was already working its way through the room. When the judge finally spoke, the words felt heavy with finality. The court finds that the inheritance, including the residence and remaining financial assets, constitutes marital property. Mr. Carter is entitled to 50% of the total value. A murmur rippled through the small gallery. Michael exhaled slowly, not in triumph but in relief. After weeks of being pushed out, silenced and painted as something he wasn't, he'd finally been heard. Outside, reporters gathered around. Flashbulbs popped, microphones pushed forward. Michael gave them one simple line before walking away. "I never wanted this fight, I just wanted fairness." Daniel clapped him on the back as they made their way to the car. "That's it," he said. "You're free." But as Michael looked out at the courthouse steps fading behind them, he knew the fight might be over on paper, but not in the hearts of the people who still wanted to see him fall. For a short while, Michael let himself believe the court's decision might close the chapter. He moved into a small condo on the edge of town, a quiet place with a view of the bay, where mornings smelled faintly of salt, and evenings carried the sound of gulls drifting home. He set up a simple routine: coffee on the balcony, work helping a friend at his woodworking shop, phone calls to his parents just to hear their voices. Then one morning, a message appeared on his phone. No name, just a short line: "Enjoy the money while you can. This isn't over." The words were cold, but the tone was familiar. Margaret. When he showed it to Daniel, the lawyer shook his head. "She's not warning you, she's baiting you. They want you rattled so you'll make a mistake. Don't give them that satisfaction." But the warning wasn't empty. Within days, Clara's name reappeared in his life through someone else, Eric. Michael had only heard the name in passing, an old boyfriend from before their marriage, the kind of man who was always on the edge of trouble. Now, it seemed, he was working with Clara and Margaret. It started as whispers. A clerk at the hardware store mentioned hearing things. A neighbour made an awkward comment about marrying for the wrong reasons. Eric was telling people Michael had schemed for Clara's money, that he'd cheated, that he'd been living off her for years. Then it escalated. Two men Michael had never seen before loitered near his building's entrance one evening, watching as he unlocked his door. They didn't speak, but their eyes followed him all the way inside. The next night, it wasn't just looks. Michael was walking back from the market with a bag of groceries when three men stepped out from behind a row of parked cars. They fanned out, blocking the sidewalk. "Nice place you got here," one of them said, nodding toward his building. "You must be doing pretty well," another added, a grin playing at the corner of his mouth. Michael kept his voice even. "If this is about money, you're wasting your time. Tell Eric I'm not scared and I'm not stupid." They stared at him for a long moment before stepping aside. He walked past them without quickening his pace, but the minute he was inside, he locked the door, set down the groceries and called Daniel. The next morning, a security company came to install cameras around the building. He met with a financial advisor to move his money into safer accounts, and he took out an insurance policy on the condo. He wasn't going to live in fear, but he also wasn't going to leave any doors open. A few days later, Michael noticed police cars parked outside a run-down property 2 streets over. Word was, Eric's name had come up in a report about illegal activity. Michael didn't ask questions. Trouble had a way of finding people like Eric, and Michael wasn't about to get pulled into it. He had other things to protect now. His peace, his dignity, and the life he was rebuilding piece by piece. It was a warm evening in early fall when the knock came. Michael had just poured himself a cup of tea and stepped onto the balcony, watching the last streaks of sunlight fade into the bay. The quiet felt earned, a kind of stillness he hadn't known in months. The knock came again, soft but steady. He set the cup down and opened the door. Clara stood there. She looked nothing like the polished woman from the courthouse. Her hair was loose, her makeup smudged at the corners. The confidence she once wore like a second skin was gone, replaced by something brittle and uncertain. "Michael," she said, voice low, "can I come in?" He hesitated before stepping aside. She walked into the living room, her eyes scanning the modest space. The bookshelf in the corner, the half-finished mug of tea, the faint scent of cedar from a candle on the table. "This place is peaceful," she murmured. Michael stayed standing. "Why are you here, Clara?" She sat on the edge of the couch, fingers twisting together. "I messed up. I let the money, the house, my mum's voice, all of it get in my head. I thought I was chasing happiness. Instead, I ran away from it." Michael said nothing, just let the silence press her to go on. "It's all gone," she admitted, her voice cracking. "The money, most of the house after I refinanced it. Bad investments, people I thought were friends. They disappeared when the bank account did. I've been so stupid." Her eyes welled up. "I miss what we had." Michael's chest tightened, but not with longing. It was the kind of ache that came from knowing the person in front of you wasn't here for love. They were here because their world had collapsed. "You're not here because you love me," he said quietly. "You're here because you're scared, because you need a lifeline." She shook her head, tears spilling. "I did love you, I still do, we could fix this." He took a step back. "No, Clara, you broke it, and you didn't just walk away, you slammed the door behind you." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she stood, wiping at her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Michael walked to the door and opened it. "I hope you find peace, but it won't be here." She paused in the doorway as if trying to memorize his face, then stepped into the hall. He closed the door gently, the latch clicking into place like a full stop at the end of a sentence. That night, he slept without waking once. For the first time in a long time, the past didn't follow him into his dreams. The weeks after Clara's visit felt different, lighter somehow. Michael kept his days simple, early walks by the bay, afternoons helping his friend finish the last touches on the woodworking shop, evenings with a book and the soft hum of the radio in the background. One Saturday morning, he drove to his parents' modest home with a set of keys in his pocket. He led them to a quiet street where a single-story house sat under a pair of old maple trees. The porch had a swing, the backyard had room for a garden. "It's yours," he said, handing the keys to his mother. She covered her mouth. His father blinked hard a few times, and Michael realised he hadn't seen them this happy in years. He wasn't spending to prove a point. He was building something steady. He invested in a couple of small local businesses, not because they were flashy, but because they were run by people who treated others the way he believed in. He gave a quiet donation to the community centre that had once helped his family when he was a kid. One crisp autumn evening, the centre hosted a fundraiser. The air smelled faintly of roasted corn and cinnamon, and strings of lights swayed gently above the crowd. Near the craft table, a woman with chestnut hair tied back loosely was laughing as she tried to help a group of kids paint paper lanterns. When she caught his eye, she walked over and offered him a cup of cider. "I'm Emily," she said, her smile warm and unhurried. "I run the art program here." "Michael," he replied, shaking her hand. They talked about small things, the kids, the best pie shop in town, the way the bay looked at sunrise. She didn't ask about his past or the headlines. She only spoke to the man standing in front of her. When the event wrapped up, they stepped outside into the cool night. The street was quiet, the moon bright above the rooftops. Emily glanced up. "Clear night," she said. "Good for a walk." So they walked, and not fast, not with any destination. Just two people moving forward at the same pace, letting the silence between them feel comfortable. Across town, Clara sat alone in the house she could no longer keep, staring at an old photograph of her and Michael under a single umbrella on a rainy day. She whispered something to herself, but no one was there to hear it. Michael didn't know, and he didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, the past had stopped chasing him. What lay ahead wasn't certain, but it didn't feel frightening anymore. It felt open, and that was enough. Lesson learned: money can change relationships, but it can't buy respect or peace. Stand up for what's fair, forgive without returning to what hurt you, and value those who love you for who you are, not for what you have. Thank you for watching until the very end. I truly appreciate it. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more. I'll see you again on Rain Inside.